Hello and welcome to another episode of Phishing for Answers. Once again, this is a special episode because it's October and that means it's Security Awareness Month. Today, I am here with Chris Nicolaou, and why don't you start by telling us the audience that story you were telling me right before we started here.
I was sitting watching an English Premier League match this weekend. I think it was the Arsenal. I'm a big follower of the Arsenal.
Okay.
I'm from London, England originally. Anyway, I start getting notifications from my payroll system for the school where I teach, and that someone is trying to log into my system. And luckily, not luckily, but skillfully, I had multi-factor authentication set up, and so I was getting the multi-factor authentication notifications from my SMS system. And I thought to myself, if I'm getting that, that means they probably have my password. And so I had to get in and change my password. And like I was telling you earlier, I use a password manager. It's at least 15 characters and super complex, and I don't even know my password. So I just had to go in, change my password. I actually changed the multi-factor authentication method to an app, to the just Google Authenticator, so I wouldn't have to worry about those notifications anymore. But yeah, that was a little scary that it just happened to me. I'm a cybersecurity guy. I'm a freaking CISO for two companies, and I'm getting notifications that somebody's actually breached my password. And the only way I know is because I'm getting those notifications. But yeah, the human element of cybersecurity is extremely important to me. And when I'm teaching class, in fact, I tell my students, if you can remember not anything else that I teach you, but that humans are the number one weakest spot in cybersecurity. That's all there is to it. And it's not through any fault of our own. We just are humans. We're gullible. We are hardworking. We are loving. We are trusting. We're humans. And if somebody's going to be some really charming person and get on the phone with us and try to vish us on a phone, vishing, trying to get us with social engineering, oftentimes we're going to trust. And that's the real focus of myself and part of my team at CloudSpace, is that we go to our clients. I was there today. We had a meeting today with an entire staff to say, this is how you will be approached. You'll be approached by somebody you may know, and they might not even know that you are being phished or vished, and they have received something that they're trying to get some information from you because they have been asked on their side. And so that's the real passion of mine, is to make sure that people understand, so that they're not going to be taken advantage of, so that they can run their businesses appropriately. And they don't want to worry about cybersecurity. They want to grow their businesses. That's 99 times out of 100. The clients that I speak with, they want to focus on their own business and let us focus on everything else.
Yeah, I mean, and that accidental insider, that person that is clicking on the fish, they don't want to get the company infected. They don't want to be malicious, and so they do want to help. And that same attitude, I think that drives them to, or that's often exploited by the bad guys. Their desire to help, I think, can be exploited by the information security team. That same desire to help exists in remediating the problem too, and being more secure and being part of the solution instead of just being part of the problem.
Yeah.
Before we jump into all things human security, tell us a little bit more about your background. So how'd you get into cybersecurity in the first place?
So I finished from U of H with an MIS degree, and I was actually working in restaurants. I was trained as a chef while I was in college. Graduated school. I was recruited into NASA. I worked for Lockheed Martin for a few years, and during that whole time, I had also joined the Air National Guard, and I was fixing F-16s. When I first started there, we were fixing F-4s because I'm old, and then went to F-16s. And there is a system that actually, I believe it was a pilot that came up with. It was similar to the IFF system. I don't know if you're familiar with IFF. It means identify friend or foe. And that's typically what air-to-air navigation, especially in the military, uses. Identify friend or foe. It's called IFF. It's an IFF system.
Makes sense.
there is a system. I believe it was one of the pilots actually at Ellington Field, where I'm in Houston, by the way. They came up with a way to track all aircraft in the sky, because at any given time you could have somewhere between 6 and 12 different aircraft in the sky, and everyone needs to know everyone else's attitude, situation, where they are, altitude, direction, speed, all these other things that are measured in aviation, basically.
Yeah.
And there was a day where, I keep teasing my friends I can sleep anywhere, because I learned how to sleep on a flight line with exactly what you have in your head and earplugs on a cot, with aircraft going all around. But
Wow.
yeah, so at any given time we had 6 to 12 aircraft in the sky. And one day the commanding officer, he was a pilot also, he said, turn the system off, let's see what happens. And so they did. And you know what? It was utter chaos. And that was the very first time I ever heard breach. The word breach. I was 19 to 20 years old. And what he said really struck me. He said, this is what happens if the enemy breaches it's not identify friend or foe. I cannot remember the name of the system. I apologize, but it's similar to that. He said, this is what happens if the enemy breaches our system and you suddenly cannot see your friends up in the sky. It's utter chaos. And so one of the pilots comes on onto his headset and he says, okay, lesson learned. Can we turn it back on, please? And so they did, but that was the first time I ever heard the term breach. And that was the first time I ever heard enemy breaching our system. So that is what sprung my real curiosity into cybersecurity. And that was 1990.
Okay. Very interesting. So fast forward a few years, how'd you get into cyber?
So I worked for, like I said, Lockheed Martin, and then I worked for an MSP here in Houston. And I kind of got into the cybersecurity realm of that because back in the early 90s, this is now 96, 97, we actually started getting, not phishing email. They weren't called phishing emails back then. They were just, viruses via email. And so we started getting viruses via emails, and I kind of was put on a team that was helping to either educate or mitigate, one of the two. And I was, because I tend to speak with people a little bit more easily than an average person who is more technologically oriented. They put me in front of people to teach them what to look for and what not to look for, and what to click on, what not to click on. And so that was kind of the first bit. And then I started my own company in 2000, an MSP. And I did a lot of that piece and then the actual mitigation of it. And then I had hired somebody else to go and, speak, but I did a lot of the speaking as well, as far as training users, and then making sure, that was the biggest thing for us, is actually training end users. It wasn't even the mitigation. If you had a Microsoft Exchange system on-prem with an email filtering system in that server or, in that domain, and then everybody had a good paid for antivirus system on their local machines, you're pretty taken care of, until you shove the human element into it, and then it mucks up the works. So I sold that business in 2013, and I've effectively been doing cybersecurity consulting and whatever else ever since then. But now I'm with a company full time, and doing effectively the exact same thing as the CISO for that company, and doing a lot of consulting on the mitigation side. Of course, now we're not implementing Microsoft Exchange on-prem, but we still have the element of local machines. We still have the element of phishing now, which is, what's the number? Something like,
4 billion or something.
4 billion on a monthly basis or annual basis. I can't remember the exact number, but I was talking to the client just today, and I said, when you are let's say you're in a cold calling environment, you have a company that does cold calling. If you can win 1% of those cold calls, so you make 100 cold calls, you actually get 4 appointments, and you win 1 deal out of those 100 phone calls. Think about that number, 1%, or even 1/4 of 1%, when you're talking about a billion phishing emails. So it's a big number.
I'll say, I mean, I think the number's probably higher, being that I did this. I was ran a lot of different red teams during my career, and we were always getting higher than 1%. I mean, we had one assessment where we got something close to 2,000% before we shut down our servers. Now that one
Killing me,
was.
boss.
Well, that one was
Bless it.
absolutely insane.
Oh my gosh.
It went viral, but I mean, if we can have one go viral, the bad guys can. And the reason I say that is, I mean, they don't have to be honest. They get to lie, and when you get to lie, it's a lot easier to get people to click. Let's be honest.
Absolutely.
Particularly when you can exploit those emotions and things like that. Um, so you said you have a passion for the human element in cybersecurity. Are there any sort of core beliefs that you have or things that you've learned over your career that apply to the human element, like maybe ways to make it more your training more effective, or just anything that you've learned that you feel passionate about?
Well, I think what that comes back to for me is having been a business owner and knowing what operations takes. When you have an operating company, you have people who are in operations, people who are in sales, people who are in accounting, things like that. To shut down the operations of a company, that is, it's impactful for a lot of people. So you might have,
Yeah.
let's say you have, let's talk about a small company, 100 people. Maybe you're doing 20, 30 million annual revenue, right? And you shut down for a few days or even a couple of weeks. You're talking about a whole lot of upset people as far as, and I don't mean angry, I mean in here,
Yeah.
their world is turned upside down, and it's very difficult. And then you talk about the business owners, really feeling a strong responsibility towards all those people. It's
Hmm.
extremely stressful. And so, if, again, as a business owner, I have felt that not necessarily from any sort of a breach, but we had Hurricane Ike, back when I had my business, and we were down. When I say down, I mean we couldn't get to people because everything was shut down. So it was a physical shutdown of the entire city of Houston, and I only lived a mile and a quarter from the. I was on the outer eye, in fact, on the outer west side of the eye, and so that was very stressful. I got to be honest, even as an ex-military guy, I was never in combat, but we had a lot of interesting things that happened in the military. That was way worse, upset for a lot of years. It was like a PTSD sort of thing. I hate to say that term because I'm nowhere near anything that real combat vets go through, but that was an upset for a long time for a lot of people. And running my business and being responsible for 10, 12 lives and their families and their wives and their children, making payroll. That's people. People are soft and deservedly so. You know what? We have a heart. We're not machines, and we have a soul. And when you have all of those in play, and you suddenly really upset a world that should not be upset, it's a real challenge.
Yeah.
I don't like
Well, it's that upsetting people's world that often is the source of the click in the first place.
absolutely.
We're cutting your benefits or we're doing whatever. And that actually leads me to another topic that I like to get into: phishing your users. So, in my past, I ran red teams. And so when we were running a red team, we didn't necessarily care about the social impact of what we did inside the organization. Our job was to be the bad guy, and the bad guy doesn't care. And so we were good at that, but that meant that we used tactics that would scare the employee, that would cause people to potentially be upset within the organization. And so it brought me to realize that there are different types of phishing for very different purposes. And I feel like when you're phishing for education, that you should be far less invasive than you might be when you're phishing for a risk assessment. Just my own personal opinion, but what do you think there?
I I think as a red team member, you still are a member of a team. The larger diaspora of the company still depends on you to find and do your job, to find vulnerabilities, find weaknesses, and find those vulnerabilities. But when it comes to the context of phishing for education, I think it needs to be done. Okay, but I will also give this little caveat: if someone is caught clicking on a phishing email, I think that needs to be handled privately and compassionately. Now, if somebody's going to be doing it several times in a row, which I think needs to be tested, I do think that needs to be tested, then there needs to be other action taken, because they really are putting the wider company at risk. And that's a real problem. Now, on the other side, if you have folks who are catching those phishing attempts and reporting those phishing attempts appropriately, heap, praise, what's the word that's used there's a book that I read.
Carrot?
No, just heap praise upon them. Like there's
yeah.
a guy that I work with on a board here in Houston. He would buy a weekend vacation for folks that did that. For folks that actually caught a phishing email, reported it appropriately, he was like, "Here, go to Mexico. Here's your vacation." He would really heap praise upon these people, and that would be seen by other people. But you don't you don't dump on people for making a mistake. You teach. That's what it's called. It's phishing for teaching. And if you really want to teach someone, you teach them compassionately. And if they have actually done the job appropriately, if you've taught them properly, they will probably click on that phishing to report it, not click on it to actually have a look at it. And when they do that, reward them appropriately. Reward them, in fact, overly appropriately.
I like it. I don't know about the vacation, just because my goal is to get 100% of the phishing simulations to be reported back. It's a lot of vacations. I was looking at one of our clients today that had, in the last 30 days, 1,600 reported actual fish that were intervened. But no, I love it. And I think that is 100% true, that we've got to praise them. It's it doesn't have to be much, but just those kudos. Hey, you did a good job. I think it goes a really, really long way to get people to be motivated to report these things. And at the end of the day, there's so much that gets through our filters, and so we have to rely on the people to be that sort of crowdsourced detection mechanism. And so the more we say, "Hey, great job," I think the more they're going to be involved. Now, you already hit on this a little bit, but I always like to bring up the subject of carrot versus stick. I feel like a lot of times we tend to be a little too heavy with the stick in this industry, and that the stick really should be a last resort. It sounds like you're in the same sort of
mentality.
Yeah. Any good stories around the carrot and the stick that you have to share, maybe?
Yeah, several. How much time do we have? I mean, just in our own company, I actually implemented that. When I came on board, it's been a couple of years now. I implemented actually doing phishing in our own company. I mean, we're an MSP. You'd like to think we'd be, 100%, and we are. We have been in all fairness, we have been 100% reporting those, but we have a scrum every Tuesday, and we bring that up. I make sure we bring it up, because I normally am the one who's being reported to. Hey, I got this phishing email. Check it out. I'll always bring it up. I mean, it's one of those. I love praising people, and I'm gonna praise them as much as possible. And what that does also is it takes my team member. It gives them a little more incentive to actually talk to their own clientele, because they work. We have sort of a, not siloed, but sort of segmented clientele, where one of our team members has been working with this client for multiple years, and they're super friendly. They've really gotten a nice relationship, and it's a real partnership, and that's what we're all about. We're not transactional. We're very partner based. We're very relationship oriented. I mean, if you can hear me talking, you should hear our CEO talking. He is a people person. He loves our clientele. He loves our people that work there. He's built a real, I hate this word, but he's built a real an ecosystem of kindness around our company. And it's really lovely. I was talking to one of my team members. Talking to one of my team members. I said, "Listen, I've had other offers for more money. I'm not going anywhere. I love this place. I love working at CloudSpace." And the reason is because of the culture that our CEO and his wife have implemented, have instilled, I should say, of really being about the people. Transactions, if you can build relationships with your clientele, build relationships with your third-party providers, the money will come. It will. It just comes because people want to work with a company that's going to build a relationship with you. And like I'm saying, I'll go back to my point. All of our team members now are super hyper focused on the cybersecurity element. Most of the phishing, of course, because it is the hammer that keeps getting pounded into our clientele, because they receive so stinking many phishing emails. Even though we have a killer filter system, and they're all 100% on our filter system, they still, a couple still leak through. It happens. Nothing is ever 100%. But our team now, since we have a CISO on board who's really pounding that education into our folks, they're going forward and pounding it into their folks, which is brilliant.
I like it. I mean, education is so critical, and how we go about it is really critical too. You made a comment early on about how, and I'm sure I'm going to misquote you here, so feel free to correct me. But you'd made a comment about how you often had people that weren't really that great at communicating in charge of this communication, thing, or rather that you got put in charge of it because so many others weren't. And I find that as maybe a little bit of an issue in cybersecurity, is that we put very technical people in charge of awareness, and really awareness isn't that technical. It's a very human, relationship driven thing. And if you make it technical, I think that's a great way to lose the user. And once you've lost the user, well, it's all falling on deaf ears.
Brother, you're preaching to the choir. That's exactly right. You have to get some element of entertainment, some element of the ability to connect to people, ability to create relationships on a very short basis because you're in front of them for maybe 15 or 20 minutes. And if you can't pull the relationship in, you will lose. Yeah, you'll lose the audience immediately. And because if you start talking about, filtering thousands of emails, and this is our filtering system, and blah 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 blah.
Here's how you look at the headers.
Exactly. You right click on the, and next thing you know, people are literally nodding off. And so
yeah. Well, I mean, I've actually seen videos where it tells them how to pull the IP address and plug that into VirusTotal. And I get the the goal behind it, but that is way too technical for the average employee. And what we want to do is demystify, not continue to mystify it more. Go ahead.
I think, pardon me. I think all education for end users, from whether you're in a technical realm and going the technical route, or going the more personal route and really building relationships, it's all well-meaning, but you've got to be able to pull people in to make them passionate about it, and give some context of how maybe the damage it does to the company, and that it might affect you personally. We might lose 25% revenue because our reputation is damaged, and I might have to lay off 25% of the people.
Yeah. Well,
that sucks.
That's one thing. I got a chance to talk to the Navy Reserve Cyber Warfare Commander, BZ, and he was talking about how he likes to start with why, and even take it a step further. Hey, you want to be able to get a mortgage, right? You want to be able to get that car loan, right? This is why it matters to you. And I do think that that's one of those things that gets missed so often. It's not, hey, just protect, the bank account of the uber wealthy or the corporate overlords or whatever, right? It's hey, this is your livelihood you need to protect. And that's why I like to recommend, integrating everywhere. No matter, even if you buy our technology tomorrow or someone else's, there's other things still to do beyond whatever the technology will do. And the example I like to give is, put a security awareness message into everyone's pay stub or onto everyone's pay stub. Or, if you have elevators, put it on the video or the television screen, or in the office, or wherever you can integrate. Make sure that security is just everywhere. And I think that's one of those things that we don't do enough of, pushing desktop backgrounds to every computer that have that simple think before you click messaging or whatever it happens to be.
Couldn't agree more. And Beezy's got it right. One of my heroes in life is Simon Sinek, and he has that book, Start With Why. I read it years ago. And to create the story around why, I think, is so impactful. And like I've mentioned earlier, that really brings people in. It brings people into the context of the story, and it brings people into for the lack of a better term, the why. Can you actually grab people by the soul and say, this is why you want to do
by the soul? I like it.
Yeah, exactly. And once you do that, once you actually have somebody and you have a good work environment, there are going to be some people who are going to be kind of eternally angry, and you're never going to satisfy them, and you'll end up weeding them out after some time. But I think most people feel like a bit of a fiduciary in the company that they work for, because it's self-serving. If you're a fiduciary, that means you're serving yourself as well. And if you are not, then it'll be self-sacrifice. Eventually, it'll be self-sacrifice.
Yeah, no, I think most people want to, and even the people that will fight you on it, they fight you on it because they're intimidated more often than it's anything else. And one thing that I'm continuously reminded of, and I try to be really careful of it because of this, the first experience most people ever have with the cybersecurity team is, hey, you need to do your training. And that's fine. But, if we follow that up with, hey, you idiot, you clicked on this, or, you've got to go do this remedial training. And if we make them feel dumb, it's game over. We've just created a barrier where we were hoping to create a bridge.
Yep, I couldn't agree more. And it depends on how senior leadership is going to trickle that message down. And I think it really starts from senior leadership. And like I was mentioning, our senior leadership, I'm part of that team. Our CTO is such a bright guy. And of course, he is also a people person. He's been with our CEO for a long time. I'm the new guy on board 2 years in. But the culture that is created around our company is, in my opinion, unparalleled. Like I said, I've had other offers, and I'm not going anywhere. I love where I work, and I wish that all other companies would have the same culture, but I know they don't, because I've worked in large companies that have been very difficult and very toxic, and even small companies that have been very difficult and toxic. So when you can, it's only beneficial to have a good working environment, especially in this context of cybersecurity, because again, it's hard. It's hard for end users to really pay attention. They're busy. They're getting on with their day. They have a day-to-day that they have multiple things to do. Everybody has way too much to do. And that's the norm in our world now. Everybody has way too much to do. I mean, I'm sitting here, my cell phone is right there, and I'm seeing, I probably, in our, I don't know how long we've been on, like 20 minutes, maybe? I've seen probably 100 different notifications from either email, text, LinkedIn, Signal, you name it. I've got 100 notifications. I might answer 3 of them because 3 of them are important. The rest of them I couldn't care less about. But we're all busy, and that takes your focus off of the cybersecurity. If you can just keep the cybersecurity top of mind, so those little trainings, like you mentioned earlier, having something in the elevator, having something on your check stub, those are trainings. Those are little micro trainings, right? It just keeps it top of mind. If you can keep it top of mind, which is why I like to visit clientele, like on a quarterly basis, keep it top of mind. It's not going to be anything ugly. I'll bring lunch in. I'm happy to feed you all because it makes it easier for us.
Yeah, no, one of the things I agree about keeping it top of mind and keeping it continuous. It reminds me of this assessment that I had done for this hedge fund in New York City. And as I'm going through or doing the readout for them, we get to a number of different social engineering findings that they had, everywhere from physically being able to talk I don't think it was me personally, but anyway, the talking our way in to phishing to I think USB drives as well, if I'm remembering it correctly. Regardless, as I get there, he says, we already do training once a year for security awareness. We already run phishing simulations. He goes, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And what I'll tell you is I can't afford to have anyone spend more than an hour a year on training. Their time's valuable. And at the beginning, when he first said that, I thought, man, this guy's an idiot. But
come on, okay, stop it with the stick.
Yeah, exactly. But as I thought more and more about it, I realized that maybe I was the one going about this all wrong. And it got me to the thought process of, well, what happens if we break this, down into 1 minute chunks? And I'm like, man, if we did break it down into 1 minute chunks, we can be in that user's inbox every week of the year. We can be educating them about security, keeping it front of mind. And all of a sudden that actually works. And that seems like a lot of training. And so it's really just a shift in perspective. But that's really for me how I initially stumbled onto it's called spaced learning theory, which is the basis for all of our advertising. But it talks about how when you break things up into little bite-sized bits and feed it to people at a high frequency, you get super high retention. Mm-hmm. And so anyway, it's I'm just reminded of that as you point that out. And I couldn't agree more. You have to keep it continuous and front of mind. And if I'm talking to you today about passwords, that doesn't mean that that's the only thing you're aware of. That talking to you about passwords keeps all cybersecurity front of mind, which, helps you be more aware of thinking before you click, even though that wasn't today's message.
Right. I fully agree with everything you just said.
So, okay, we've talked through a couple things here. Now, one of the things that I've heard a study about that said that people are something like 10 times or you get like 10x higher retention rates when it's contextual to the person's role within the organization. And as I read through like the new requirements for CMMC to level 2, you see that they're pushing toward more and more role-based training. Mm-hmm. What roles do you think we should be training our people on?
I think I don't understand the context of the question as far as the roles.
So just
roles in cybersecurity or roles otherwise in the business.
Cybersecurity. So like if I'm the example I'd give is like you were talking about DevOps and developers at the beginning. I think developers are a great one, making sure that they all have OWASP top 10 training so they're not making those mistakes. But yeah, I guess what I'm just asking is what roles should we be looking at as we try to deploy role-based training? We clearly can't do everything. So what roles do you think are the most critical?
When you're talking in the context of CMMC, there are so many different levels of assessment that have to happen, especially when you're talking about DoD and basically the defense industrial complex, or is it DID or DIC? I can't remember.
I think it's DIB.
Defense industrial base. Yes.
Yeah.
DIB. And when you're talking about, if let's say let's go into the development phase, okay, the software development piece. How many times have you seen a dev team finish a sprint and not go through a code review?
Oh, it happens all the time. I mean, they should always go to a code review. But I've been the pen tester on enough dev teams to know how that works. And more often than not, we'd get in there once every 2 years, and everything that happened in the middle was just pushed without a security test on it,
Yeah.
and sometimes without even QA testing, depending on the application.
So if you're talking about roles that need to be trained in cybersecurity, let's talk about the entire dev team, the entire dev ecosystem. When you're talking about devs, you're talking about scrum masters, you're talking about DevOps, all the directors that are involved in those things actually managing, that should be managing code reviews, pen test reviews, pen tests, because you can pen test, but if you don't review the pen test, then you're even worse off. So in the context of CMMC, when you think about what's at stake, okay, I'm a military guy. I love the military. I loved my time in the military, but I also know the attack surface in the military is so huge because you have people. I'm not going to dump on the military, but I tell you what, when I was in boot camp, some of the people that were in boot camp with me, I joined before I went to college because I needed a way to pay for college. But some of the people that were in Air Force boot camp with me were subpar, full stop. They were just subpar. And so when you think about that alone, just the inside threat to the military, not even talking about the outside threat. So now you start getting into the outside threats where you have maybe a third party that's doing some sort of a software development for, who the heck knows, some missile system or some missile database system, or an airplane communication system where you have fighter jets that know where each other are, and that hasn't been code reviewed and hasn't been pen tested. There's absolutely no security checks on that whatsoever. I think developers need to be trained. I think DevOps need to be trained. I think that the CIO, CTO, all those people who are actually senior leadership on those projects, because they, when you have a development project like that, you have CIO, CTO, CISO, directors under them, DevOps people, developers, and you might have, in a team that I was running, I had developers on 4 different continents.
Yeah. Well, and you potentially supply chain issues there too, because
oh my gosh,
you've got the hardware that you have to make sure comes in just as securely as everything else, or that's your weak point.
It's a dizzying array of attack surfaces.
It is.
It's a dizzying array. Like I said, I had developers in Colombia, US, Europe, in Latvia, and then in India. So literally 4 continents, developing around the world, and I wasn't even the CISO of that group yet. And then the CTO, who I grew up with, basically says, "You're the CISO now because nobody's doing security tests." So that's when we got everything together as far as doing code reviews. And it took longer. You know what? It took longer. But we secured everything. And we had to actually go back. So we had already gone through probably 3 or 4 different sprints. So we're 2 months in, basically. And now I'm saying, okay, listen, we found some issues in our code reviews. Let's go back to it all. We're just going to stop dev for the next 2 weeks. Our sprint is going to be a security sprint, full stop. And so, in the context of answering your question, I'm going to come back because it's just in the circuitous route. I think devs definitely need to be highly trained in cybersecurity. DevOps are generally better because they have to actually build out that infrastructure for the software, and they, because it's more of a physical element, even though it's all cloud-based, it's a physical element. And their names are on it. They're going to be a little more careful. But for me, devs, and then skip over DevOps because I think they're more conscientious. Get into the CIO and CTO. CISO, of course, they better be conscious about it because.
Well, I would hope they are.
That's a bloody job.
But then again, I it's rare, but I have run into a couple CISOs that are very much business people. They do not come from the technical side of things.
Happens a lot.
They were just sort of shoved into probably IT at some point in their career, but they're much more business oriented. And
Yep.
so, you'd think they would have that deep tech, security background, but not all CISOs do. And I don't know that you necessarily need it if you're doing the right things and you understand why you're doing them. I think it is key that you understand why you're doing them.
Well, yeah,
But,
that's true. Yeah. But I think you,
but,
in that case, you had better be a people person and build a good team.
yeah.
Because if you
Oh,
don't surround yourself
agreed.
with a good team, you will fail, and you will
Oh,
fail miserably.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we've talked through phishing, but carrot versus stick. So and we've now hit on role-based training a little bit. When it comes to uh, making security awareness fun, have you learned any tricks or anything over the years that you can give people advice? Like how can we make this more entertaining for people?
You can do a role based sort of play like I've done before. You actually do a play, like almost
Like
like a
a
role,
read through, you put them
like
at a table?
yeah, a role play, and actually have a phishing email that comes in, and next thing you know, you click on it, they're pulling data out of your machine, and it makes everyone a little uncomfortable, but we all know it's also for dramatic effect. Everyone knows it's for dramatic effect, and so you can actually literally see people like squirming in their chairs, going, "Oh my God, this could actually happen to me. This would be awful," and then people start deleting pictures and things from their personal laptops. And I've also there are actually YouTube videos on social engineering. There's one that I show in my class all the time when we do the social engineering piece of it. Interestingly, I'm teaching an ethical hacking class right now. I have two classes. One is UCSD and one is at UC Boulder. It's all online, obviously, because I'm in Houston. But I bring up a couple of videos. One of them is a young lady who I think they're at some sort of security conference, and she stops a guy who's a podcaster, I think, or a news guy, and he says, what's the worst thing that can happen? And she said, well, I'm gonna imitate your girlfriend or wife or whatever the case is, and I'm gonna call your cell phone company and get all your information. You watch. And so in front of him, she calls a cell phone company, and she's spoofed his number off of her laptop. Not only has she spoofed his number, but she's got a baby crying in the background as background noise. And she's like, "Oh, I'm so sorry, my baby's just going crazy, and my fiance wanted me to get my information for the cell number now because we're going to transfer it all." And sure enough, 30 seconds later, she has all his information. And the guy's like, "Oh my God!" And that was real time. I mean, she did it real time. And you know what?
Yeah.
She's charming. She's alarmingly charming, in fact. And then she's also pretty savvy as far as human psychology is concerned. The sound of a crying baby for men, especially, is something that we want to get away from immediately. I know that sounds sexist, but it's the truth. There's a frequency that makes men's brains a little nuts when it comes to that.
Well, I think in general, the part that people maybe don't realize about social engineering is that there's very specific cognitive biases that are being exploited.
Oh, yeah.
And it may sound like it's just another conversation. It may sound like it was easy, but it's the way they approach it. It's the way that they do things that delivers a very specific outcome. And I think a lot of people, they're not very aware of all of the different cognitive biases, how those cognitive biases are used as mental shortcuts in their thinking process. And I think that lack of awareness is part of the reason that it can so easily be used against them.
Yeah, and if you don't have a PhD in psych, then you're kind of toast. Those folks who are actually plugged in, they don't even have to be PhDs in psych. They have some innate knowledge of the cognitive bias of human beings, and are able to really exploit that. and they're bright. They're really, really smart people, and they understand social cues. They understand even just a little twinkle in someone's eye or a twitch in their mouth or something like that. And they're, they're just smart people. They're way smarter than I am. And if they would just maybe just go become a salesperson, they'd be millionaires,
Yeah. I mean, social engineering was the thing that, well, it was funny when I started down the ethical hacking path. I was like, man, I'm never going to be a social engineer. I'm going to be technical. And then, like, my first physical engagement, I talked my way into a bank vault. I'm like, okay, that was fun. And it led me to really diving into that. And what's interesting is that while I had taught myself to code and even do a little bit of hacking back in high school, I went to school for marketing, and that really, I found a lot of it applied when I got over into social engineering. But yeah, it was. I think there's a little bit of a natural knack for it, or maybe a natural lack of a knack for it. I say that because when I was younger, I was just had terrible social skills, and so I read a lot of psychology books, and I do wonder how much that like impacted my ability to do social engineering, because I just didn't want to be socially awkward. But I still to this day wonder about that. Now, I do want to, before we, I have to wrap up here. We're getting low on time, but I do want to talk a little bit about AI. AI is changing the threat landscape. What to you are the biggest threats that AI poses? And then on the other side of that, what are the biggest opportunities that you think it poses?
So in the context of what we're talking about with phishing, especially, the ability to very, very quickly automate phishing attempts is just dizzying, frankly. And the ability of, you probably have ChatGPT on your phone. I mean, you probably use it for different things and writing emails. And
I love ChatGPT.
I use the hell out of it. I really use it quite a lot, did different random things. And you can, because I've tried it in my ethical hacking class, I said, in the context of a CEO who runs a bank, blah, 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 I just gave like a whole situation, write a phishing email. But, in that context with ChatGPT, you actually do have to give it a disclaimer to say this is strictly for educational purposes, blah, blah, blah. And so, it wrote it.
You have to convince it to do it. But,
exactly. But, it came out and I was like, that is way better than I could have ever written it. And you know what? You can write a routine where all you have to do is plug in manufacturing CEO, banking CEO, private equity CEO, fish firewall CEO, whatever. And it'll write a contextual, brilliant email, charming as hell. And the automation power behind AI is just getting stronger. It's so strong right now, and it's just going to keep getting stronger because you know what? Memory's cheap, processors are cheap, and the more memory and processors you can throw at that, GPUs, CPUs, whatever, it'll just become faster and faster and faster.
And O1 is testing at a PhD student level. So, we've gone in 1 year from, a really smart, like 10-year-old to PhD student. So how long before it truly is smarter than that $300 an hour consultant? And I mean, I've already found that it can give you a lot of those answers that you would have had to have gone to that $300 an hour consultant for.
There's a friend of mine. He's an attorney out of Colorado, and he has actually started an AI document company where they pay him a flat fee for certain documents, and he doesn't write them. He just puts in the ChatGPT, gets whatever output is there, and edits it a little bit, and good to go.
Yeah, they got this new voice AI voice generator thing, and there's still this huge market for voiceover work. And I was thinking, man, I should just automate a tool that goes in, applies for all of those jobs, wins them, does the voice work, pumps it out, and just writes me a check because I don't have to do anything.
And what you don't know, I'm not really here. I'm on holiday in Cyprus.
Yeah, no, but how long before that's a real thing? I mean, one of my VPs was sending me this link about how you can create your own clone. And when you record the voice and then attach the clone to your voice, it's actually really impressive how real it can look.
Yeah, impressive or terrifying? You pick your adjective, you know?
Terrifying might be it. I mean, they're saying that AI is going to be able to generate movies on the fly. It's able to right now upscale video games that, like take an old Doom game and make it like, photorealistic.
Yeah.
So it's going to be real interesting, I think, to see what happens. I also think that there's a lot of education that we have to do around AI too. And I think that that's going to be one of the things that is currently something that's a little bit difficult to stay on top of, but it's going to continue being difficult to stay on top of. How do we educate our people about deep fakes? How do we educate our people about the use of these large language models? How do we educate our people about how to even distinguish the difference between the different large language models? Like, there's so many different elements here that are at play. And I mean, that if we're not giving them instructions, they're figuring it out on their own, is my assumption.
And that's terrifying in and of itself. You talk about AI 1.0, where we are right now, a year or so in. When you talk about the defense of AI 1.0, we're at, defense 0.5.
Well, our industry is only just now even starting to accept AI. I mean, just a year ago, people were still very hesitant of letting AI do things for them in cybersecurity. And I get it, but the only way we stay in front of these AI-driven attacks is with AI.
Yeah, they've got to get I mean, the companies that are doing phishing defense, filtering, email filtering, they've got to get their own algorithms in place, because, in the same vein as, let's say, I have 2 children in university right now. If they write their papers with ChatGPT, the instructors can tell, the professors can tell. They plug it into their own anti-ChatGPT system. I don't even know what it's called. And they're like, nope, that's not going to happen. Go rewrite it or you're out. One of the two. And so in that same vein, that is in the works. I know it is right now, because we use an email system, an email filtering system that does have an element of AI that can recognize some. It's not great.
But the problem is that everyone's using AI, and while in an academic level, maybe, but I actually heard about, I think it was students at Harvard, and it was a Harvard professor that was using one of those tools and found that it was lying. And so, even these tools that are designed to detect, content written by AI are having their own hallucinations, which is a problem in and of itself. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see what happens there, but I couldn't agree more. It's really terrifying what's happening. Any sort of final words for our audience before we wrap up today?
Well, first of all, thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for inviting me on board.
Thank you for being here. It's been a
blast. This is wonderful. Yeah, this is actually wonderful. And I hope I've given my students the link, or at least certainly have given them the ability to have a look at this on LinkedIn. They know who I am and where I am. And so, God willing, they've been able to watch. I think it's been eye-opening for me. I hope it's been eye-opening for you and for our students.
Absolutely.
And clients that have actually connected as well. I think what you guys do is just really solid work in the field of anti-phishing and getting the education out there, getting the word out there. I'm very, very delighted to be able to get on with you to actually put that word out there about education, about really protecting people, protecting companies. I think it's the most important thing in my personal experience. I'm 56 years old. I've been doing this for a minute, since 1992. To be able to help companies and people to be able to recognize these things and be able to just operate their company, with relative comfort, with a comfort level that I can provide, that you can provide for other people in the cybersecurity field and IT field that can provide, I think is a real gift for us, for you and me, and for the folks who else are working out there in the trenches. I'm not so much in the trenches anymore. I'm in senior leadership positions. I have to motivate people in the trenches, which I'm of course happy to do, and I love doing what I do. And I think what you and your folks are doing to help business and to help people is tremendous, an absolutely tremendous effort, and it's a heavy lift. Trust me, I know what your lift is.
I mean, anyone in the defense, the bad guys only have to be right once. We have to be right all the time.
Absolutely.
And I think that's the anthem of our industry, right? We have to be right all the time.
One time. Yeah, we have to be right all the time. Exactly. Yeah.
So it's the same as try harder if you've ever been through any of the offset courses, that's their slogan. I think it's trademark. So
you're going to get a call about that.
I may very well. All right. Well, hey, thank you for joining us today. Have a great day.